Okay.
Gerald Martin, welcome.
All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the February 22nd, 2021 meeting of the Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel at 6:30. So we're just going to go through a roll call of those in attendance. My name is John Mahoney, and I'm an appointee from the town of Plymouth by the Select Board. Mr. Grassi? Rich, can you just... All right, we'll go back to Rich. Mr. O'Brien?
Pat O'Brien, Manager, Communications and Government Affairs for Holtec.
Dave Noyes?
Sorry, I had trouble coming off mute. Dave Noyes, Compliance Manager, CDI.
Pine?
Pine Dubois, appointed by the Speaker of the House.
Mr. Moylan?
Tom Moylan, Site Vice President, HDI, Pilgrim Station.
Paul Smith?
Paul Smith, appointed by the Utility Workers Union of America, representing good men and women who work at Pilgrim Station.
Mary Waldron?
Mary Waldron, Executive Director, Old Colony Planning Council.
Ms. Lampert?
Mary Lampert, appointed by Senate President. Senate President.
Okay. Jack Priest?
Jack Priest, Radiation Control Program Director, representing the Department of Public Health.
Mr. Drabinski?
Joan Drabinski, I'm a geologist and LSP and consultant to HDI. Thank you.
You're welcome.
John Flores is here too.
Yep, go ahead, John. And
Yeah, no, John Flores is here. I just lost my video for some reason, so I'm gonna have to come back.
I can still see you.
Okay, good.
You're appointed by who?
The governor.
Okay. Mr. Rothstein?
Richard Rothstein, good evening, everybody. Town of Plymouth Board of Selectmen appointee.
Dave Johnson?
Hi, Dave Johnston, Mass DEP, and I'm representing Secretary Threates. And also tonight, like last month and new this month, is Gerard Martin from the Southeast Region of Mass DEP and Seth Pickering from the Southeast Region of Mass DEP. And Gerard and Seth have responsibilities over the Bureau of Air and Waste and the Bureau of Waste Site Cleanup, so they sit in and assist the Interagency work group from time to time.
Thank you, Mr. Martin and Mr. Pickering, for attending tonight. We'll go on to Samantha Phillips.
Hi, good evening. Sam Phillips, Director of the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency.
Mr. O'Reilly.
Hi, Kevin O'Reilly, Town of Plymouth, appointed by the Speaker of the House.
Robert Jones.
Good evening, Robert Jones, Executive Office, Health and Human Services, representing Secretary Mary Lou Sutters.
Susan Whitaker.
Hi, Sue Whitaker. I am the Regional Director for the Massachusetts Office of Business Development and representing Secretary Keneally from the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development.
Thank you. And David Nichols is in the car. I believe he's an appointee by the governor.
Correct. Yep, and Plymouth resident.
Okay. All right, David. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
You're welcome. Just moving on to the first agenda item, well, the second agenda item, which is the previous meeting's minutes. And I'm sorry, Pine, did you get Mr. Grassi also? I know we went through the roll call, so don't forget Richard Grassi. Okay, did anybody have any concerns about the prior meeting's minutes?
I came in late for that meeting. I was listed as being absent. I came in about halfway through.
Okay.
John,
Fine, did you catch that?
Yes, I got that. Yep.
Any other concerns with last month's meetings minutes?
Motion to approve.
I had a question for clarification on page 3. It looks like line 17. It says, this is relative, DJ, maybe you can answer this, relative to the removal of, it says 12 soil absorption systems to make room for enhanced plantings. Are we taking out all 12?
Yes, so the The soil absorption system is 36, and 12 of them will be sacrificed for an enhanced planting array.
Gotcha. Okay. Great. And on page 4, line 13, holding bi-weekly meetings, isn't that with regulatory stakeholders, just to clarify? Mr. Lawson indicated that Holtec has worked with the state to provide additional information, holding bi-weekly meetings with stakeholders, it says. I would suggest saying regulatory stakeholders.
That's right, Pine. Those meetings are with representatives from DPH and Mass DEP.
And those were the only clarifications I had. Did anybody else have anything?
Just the attendance with respect to Mr. Flores, and I think that's it.
Yep, I
Nope,
have that.
I know you got that. And then I think there was somebody out there who was about to make a motion.
Before you do that, was Dick Quintal's name missing from the list of attendees or non-attendees?
Quintal. Oh, you're correct about the fact that he's missing. Do you recall whether he's here? I can relook at the.
I don't remember Dickie being on last meeting.
No, he wasn't on at the last meeting, but yeah, you're correct, Rich. The select board chose him as their new designee.
Okay, I'll put that in there as meeting members not present.
Did he get an invite to tonight's meeting?
We would have to ask PACTV, and they're no longer on, but I will ask. I'm pretty sure he gets my emails, doesn't he?
He's been on already, previous meetings. I think it was there for the.
Let me make sure.
No, I can follow up with him this week. I don't think he's attended a meeting yet.
All right, we didn't meet in December. That's right. Well, I think he was appointed in December.
Yes. So I don't think he's had the opportunity to attend a meeting yet. So I'll follow up with him this week. I'm sure he was ecstatic to be appointed. So, all right. Any other concerns with respect to the meeting minutes? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is it Mr. O'Brien? Second?
Second.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch. Was that Mr. O'Reilly?
Yeah, it's Kevin.
Okay. All right, all those in favor of approving last meeting's minutes with the delineated changes?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? It looks like Pine, it's unanimous.
Okay.
Any abstentions? What's that, Pine?
I just got Bobby Hayden's on the phone now, just so you know.
Okay. Okay. We'll move along to the third agenda item, which is the Holtec CDI update coming from Mr. Patrick O'Brien.
All right, let me just share my screen. So thank you. I appreciate the opportunity as always. And since it feels like Groundhog Day, like we weren't here that long ago, I don't have a particularly long update for work completed since the last meeting. We continue our work through reactor vessel internal segmentation. We continue to work on our separator. We have segmented 154 of our upper riser tubes, and the lower riser tubes part of that separator is currently in process for segmentation. I know last month I had the diagram what the separator looked like. Once we finish that segmentation of the separator, move on to a piece called the top guide. That's ready for segmentation once that separator is complete. And we continue to ship waste boxes to Texas through Q2 this year. We have shipped 5 so far in 2021. Probably the biggest thing for those on site here to see for work completed since our last meeting was the removed overhead 345 transmission lines from the main transformer to the switchyard. That was done last Wednesday, Thursday by Eversource. We had them in, did a lot of coordination with them ahead of time to ensure they follow our procedures while following their own to ensure safety. And that project was done safely and error-free, completed in one day on February 17th. Last month, I touched on for 2021 some of our outbuilding and tank demolition that's proposed for 2021. We've moved through and completed some of that since our last meeting. We are still looking at the exterior storage tank demolitions in the first and second quarter of 2021 for firewater storage, one of the two tanks, the demineralizer tank, and the condensate storage tank. We're working to do internal condenser bay demolition in the second quarter of 2021. Completed since we last met. I think last time I said it was in progress, but we did remove the east side hydraulic control units. Were removed from the reactor building. We still have an additional bank of units that we'll do at a later date on the west side of the plant. We are working through and have relocated our team that was in the access control building, brought them over here to the engineering support building, which is the main office space on the site. So we've moved them over. We have surveyed and emptied out that building, and pending demolition permitting, we will take that building down in March. We're in the process of, we finished completing the emptying out of the rigging loft and doing the surveys and gapping for that building. The demolition looks to be late February pending permits for that project. And then a little bit further down the line, the old original executive admin building, we have emptied that out. We're done the engineering and structural analysis, and again, pending permits, that demolition will occur in May. Just a brief update. I know Mark talked in pretty good depth last time about where we were with site characterization and the timeline. So we did get the draft final report to Holtec on February 18th from our characterization team. We're going through the internal and the LSP reviews by March 15th. We'll look to have a final rev of that by the end of March, and our LSP will be looking to amend the ESA work plan with that information by the end of May 2021. I know some of the major work that I think everyone understands is going to occur here this year is our fuel campaign. So just wanted to give everyone kind of an update of where we're headed to with that. We have 34 casts to be completed during this campaign. That will completely empty all fuel from the spent fuel pool. We'll have preparations and mobilizations to the site by the fuels team beginning in May. We'll start loading fuel in June. And all fuel and greater than Class C waste will be in the two non-fuel waste containers up on the pad by January of 2022. And then I'll just ask Dave Noyes, we wanted to touch on, the NRC inspections that occurred in 2020, just to give the panel an idea of what oversight has been occurring at the NRC level of the project as we've done. So I'll turn it over to Dave real quickly.
Thanks, Pat. In addition to the formal inspections that you see on the list, the NRC does continue its monitoring of Pilgrim performance through daily touch points, review of our corrective action program, implementation, and weekly phone calls that we have with our project manager. But in addition to those touch points, which we receive questions and items to discuss in those meetings, we had formal inspections of 2020 of the station's fire protection program, an inspection of the 11 cast dry cast storage campaign, the dry run prior to performance of that, and then both a remote and on-site inspection of the dry cast storage campaign. In addition to that, inspections of the second ISFAC and haul path design and construction. We had 4 NRC quarterly inspections in 2020. Those focused on the regulatory areas of quality assurance, spent fuel pool safety, emergency plan staffing, modification and design control implementation, our corrective action program effectiveness, reactor protection controls, and our radiological effluent measurement and reporting.
Thanks, Dave. And with that, that's actually all I had for the short month as an update to the project of what we have going on down here.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Go to Dave Johnson for an update from the Interagency Working Group.
Oh, I had one
Ask any
question.
question?
Yeah, I just had a quick question for either Pat or Dave. We may have asked this in the past, but that slips my mind. The readouts for the 220-foot Met Tower, those go to the main control room. So at what point would the main control room be getting demolished? And when that happens, is there another place where the readouts would be sent to, off-site or somewhere else on site until such time that the tower would be dismantled at the appropriate time?
So staffing in the main control room will continue through fuel on pad. With respect to the Met Tower, if you go back to the Attorney General's agreement, we can take that down at any point and rely on National Weather Service data. We intend to keep that tower through fuel on pad and then decide at a date at that point what we will be doing, whether that will stay in place or whether that will come down and we'll rely on the National Weather Service data per the agreement.
Jack?
Thanks, Pat. Thanks, Dave. Pat, I just had a couple of questions. The 3 tanks that you're planning to do demo work in Q2, are those now emptied?
I know one of the 2 firewater storage tanks that is empty. That's the one we plan to take down. The other 2, I might defer to John Moylan offhand. I'm not sure.
So Jack, the condensate storage tanks, those are both empty. And we do have 1 firewater storage tank that's empty.
What, somebody else asked me this question and I couldn't answer the question. What is the makeup source? Is there a stored makeup source for the spent fuel pool while there's fuel in the pool?
Yes, and we're utilizing our treated water tanks right now as makeup. We have a whole inventory of water on the Taurus also.
Thanks. And then I had a question for Dave Noyes. Were there any audit findings from the NRC on the quarterly reports that you could brief out on?
On the quarterlies, there were no violations identified during those activities. With each quarterly inspection, we get opportunities to learn that we enter into our corrective action program, but there were no findings or violations in any of the quarterly inspections.
Thank you.
Mary Lampert?
Yes. On the fire protection program, I had a concern on mutual aid that it appeared that the NRC spoke only to the licensee and not to the fire chief or emergency management director in the mutual aid towns such as Duxbury, Kingston, Carver, I believe, not Carver, Bourne, whatever. And the concern, which I learned through Duxbury, was that they did not receive the training that they requested. And so there are 2 issues here. One is sending trainers to train the mutual aid town trainers better, that the firemen get on site, in my opinion, and some of the firemen's opinion. And the second issue is the inappropriateness of the NRC making a determination of sufficiency based on talking simply to the licensee and not, in this case, going out and talking to the mutual aid to see that they felt the program was working as it should be. That's just a correction.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick about the training piece. So Dave Noyes has been very, very good about this. We have made the offer to the mutual aid towns to provide training to the trainers. In addition, we spoke directly with Chief Nord, reached out end of last week, along with Chief Douglas in Kingston. And we're looking to get appropriate personnel that they deem onto site to go through the walkthrough that we had provided for Plymouth Fire. We keep obviously in constant contact with the Plymouth Fire Chief, and he works obviously with the mutual aid communities. That would be, his direct work co-workers in that area. So there is plans. We are just finalizing. We got to get back to Chief Nord from our email. I think it was Friday, Dave, if I'm not mistaken. But to get back with him and then find the time, we'll have a trainer come up, train their trainers, and then also provide them an opportunity to come down and walk through the site.
That's great. And you're also going along with the request for financial remuneration?
No, because when we did our final agreements with them after the grant period for what was left of Zerk Fire, I worked directly with each fire chief or emergency management person, whoever was designated by each community. It was made very clear to them that the training dollars were going to stop the end of the program because the EPZ has now shrunk to the site boundary, no longer covered those communities. So
well, this isn't an EPC issue. This is a mutual aid issue. It's apples and oranges.
I'm 100%. I understand exactly what you're saying, Mary. I had the conversations directly with the Plymouth Fire Chief about specifically mutual aid. And in a number of those agreements with the other communities, and you can look up, I believe it was Duxbury's, but there's specific language in there about should they ever be called for mutual aid, there's certain provisions. But it was more based on that, should they be called, not a holding pattern. So we worked through that. We negotiated in good faith with the communities, and we had final agreements on that.
Good, thanks for covering it. But it leaves the NRC issue out. And I've contacted the NRC.
Yeah, I'm not going to speak to the NRC. I don't speak to them.
Well, you've got to expand your horizons.
I am working in New York. That's why I'm heading to New York tomorrow.
Not speaking for the NRC, Pat, but the scope of that inspection is defined. And does that scope include reaching out to mutual aid communities, or was the fire inspection for the protective services just on site?
I defer to Dave on that one. He deals directly with
it included the liaison with the town of Plymouth. So it reviewed the memorandums of understanding with the host community and the terms of that agreement.
And this is Sam, just to jump in. I think the training issue that we've been talking about the last couple of months is on its way to being resolved. But in March, when the Pilgrim Working Group meets, which is the communities that used to be the EPZ members, we're also going to bring in the Department of Fire Services and their hazmat program to talk about any other training that we can offer to supplement what's currently in place. So Mary, I think we'll be able to, make sure that, and I've spoken with Chief Nord many times, I think we can sort of make sure that all of the needs are addressed through a combination of training opportunities.
Oh, great, appreciate it.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, then we'll move on to Dave Johnston, the IWG update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So firstly, to you and the co-chair, I noticed that Diane Turco flagged a question in on the chat line. I didn't know how you wanted to handle those kind of questions we get during the flow of the meeting, if you wanted to try to answer them as best we could, or if you wanted to put them to the end. It was a pretty simple question I think we can hopefully answer, but I just want to get some clarity there.
Yeah.
Okay, so if it was a question.
I was going to ask Dave Noyes. It's just a very simple, what corrective actions needed to be implemented if we want to talk at a very high level, because obviously corrective actions are something that we still do every day. We write condition reports with any issue we find addressed at the smallest level, but I'll let Dave speak to anything in that particular inspection report.
I don't understand what her question is.
I just know one of the inspections looked at our corrective action program. So maybe Dave, just at a high level, what that inspection was focused on and where we can go from there.
The CAP review identified that we still have a very low threshold for identification and documentation of issues, and also gave us positive feedback on the prioritization for items that are put into the corrective action program to make sure they're dealt with commensurate with their safety significance.
Dave, you might expound a little bit on the, what does that mean that you have a low threshold?
It means that, you know, what the things that are required to be entered into the corrective action program are those that are in accordance with NRC regulations determined to be adverse to quality conditions. We expand the use of our corrective action program to include items that job delays, training concerns, industrial safety challenges, kinds of things that don't rise to the level of being an adverse to quality condition from the NRC definition, but items that we want to ensure that we have captured and that we take corrective action, including extent of condition for.
Thank you.
So I think, you know, from the non-NRC perspective, the corrective actions that might result from the assessment going on have not happened yet, and those are going to be a bit down the road until the assessment is complete and they move through the process of identifying what, if any, corrective actions would need to occur. And then, you know, they do demolitions, they do have to do asbestos abatements, which technically aren't really corrective action per se, but those are activities where they have to resolve a condition of concern prior to moving to demolition completion. So hopefully, Diane, that answered all your questions. So in terms of the Interagency work group update for this month, I really don't have a heck of a lot to report. I expect that in March, we will have more to report in 3 specific areas, and those include the feedback from the Interagency work group on the report that Pat mentioned, and that report does start to look at some of the sampling results. So that's going to be our opportunity to take a look at the data that's coming in, what it tells us, where it's coming from, and give some feedback on what we would see as the next steps following up on that data. Additionally, we hope to make some more progress on the mechanism for the availability of information like this report, for instance. And I've been working with Pat on trying to carve out what that would look like with deference to the settlement agreement, which does speak to it to a degree, and then also in looking at the Freedom of Information Act, which is something we talk about here quite often, and Jim Lampert often brings it up. So we are working through that, and we'll have to involve the AG, and hopefully by March we'll have a little bit more to report. I don't know if Pat wants to.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'll just jump in for 1 second. I've been working with our legal counsel just to ensure we're looking through the agreement and what's required to be submitted. And then we're looking at we've developed a rough framework that obviously is very rough. I sent to DJ today that we're going to take a look at and work to finalize. That'll include what documents obviously we would like to put out at the public level, and then per the agreement, what could be protected that we may have that we haven't shared yet. So we're working through that process. It's very initial, but we'd like to have some conversations back and forth with the state so that we encapsulate everything I think that's intended to make sure that we are as transparent as possible per the agreement.
So hopefully come March, we'll have a lot more to talk about in that area.
Yeah, and I hope to have some actual documents shared by then. I'm working with our legal counsel for that. Some of the more, and I don't want to say it in a weird way, but the low hanging fruit, the stuff that we think is pretty easy. That's it might be already publicly available, but might just be easier to get out there in kind of this forum, one stop shopping more so.
So, and I didn't have a chance to circle back with Jack on this, but Jack has repeatedly brought up splits. And that's something that we'll hopefully have a little bit more to talk about next month. I know in the past we've talked about the notion of developing some kind of protocol, and I don't know, Jack, if you want to follow up on that, but that's something that hopefully by March we'll have a little bit more clarity there as well, split sampling.
I have nothing to report out for this meeting.
So that is, that's all I have to report. And I noticed that Jim Lampert is asking a question. Do the chair and co-chair want to go to that question at all, or?
Is that a public document?
Jim, just so you know, it's a real rough potential letter that we would ask DJ to sign. And our plan is to work through that to add a couple of amendments to it that would add the specific documents. So it's not in a spot yet, that I would say, but I have no problem once we work through actually having a conversation of this should be in, this is what we're looking to protect, what it is. And we're looking at the entirety of the agreement. So things in talking with Dave Johnston today, things that are probably documents that become closer to the end of the project, incorporating to make sure we get those in there with a rough timeline.
So I agree that the document isn't ready for public release yet. It's really in development, and literally it came partially populated to me today. So it's really not even a letter or a submission at this point. But as Pat said, our goal is to have something developed that we can talk more about come March, so that folks know where to go for data and know what to expect for what the availability would be.
Mary?
Yes. Could you clarify, Dave, what you meant by split? Did you mean you would split? You said there were 3 areas: feedback on the report, hope progress for mechanism to make things public, and then you just said split. Like, what does that mean? Where you plan to take split samples, or what? What did you mean?
Yeah, I'm sorry not to be clear on that. Yeah, the settlement agreement does acknowledge the taking of split samples, and Mass DEP and DPH both intend on taking some number of split samples. It's not like we would take, every sample would be a split, but we want to have a thoughtful process for when and where we take split samples, and we have not, landed on exactly what that's going to look like yet.
And are you going to discuss independent samples other than split, in addition to?
Well, if we see reason to take an independent sample, we would do that. The notion of split sampling is we will be ensuring that they have a comprehensive sample plan that'll be adequate to characterize the site. And then, we'll look through that sample plan and decide how many of those samples we should take a split sample. What that does is it validates the accuracy of their samples. And if in doing that, we see a spot that we think ought to be sampled, I think, more likely than just running over there and grabbing one, which we could do, it's more likely we would look for them to take one too, or certainly point out that that's an area that we think needs to be sampled. So if we're doing it right, we look at the data that comes in, we look at their sampling plan, and then we give them feedback on its adequacy. And if we think there's an area that's not getting enough samples to get a representation of what it might look like from a contamination perspective, then we look for them to sample it. And then if if we felt like we need to take a split for that from that area, then we do that.
Okay, now I understand. And I just hope that your report in March on these 3 issues is comprehensive, because it's not only that we want to know what you all are doing, but perhaps put some input into suggestions. Because
Sure,
May,
so-
March to May is not a long period of time.
So the way the settlement agreement works is that we are obligated to give them written comments on the environmental site assessment. And then when we do that, it starts a 30-day clock for them to respond to those comments. So, so that's the process that we're looking to hopefully, either have ready to talk about in March, or certainly have, further developed now that we actually have, seem to have some data to take a look at.
Mm-hmm.
Richard?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on Mary's question. I'm a little rusty on my chemistry 101, 102, but when you're doing a split sample, if it's sample or a sample in the soil and it was a heavy metal and it's sent to Holtec's lab as well as DPH's or DEP's lab, it's, then basically the metal's in the sample. So if it was analyzed right away in one lab, as opposed to a week or two or three or a month for the sake of argument, that's one thing. But if it's let's say it's a volatile or semi-volatile, and that's in the soil or water, make a difference in terms of time frame when the sample might get analyzed. So there, if it wasn't done around the same time, could there be a slight difference in the analytical result simply on the basis of how and when it's being analyzed?
Sure. I'm going to ask Gerard to answer that question. Do you mind, Gerard?
So when you, for every analysis there's specified holding times by which you have to actually analyze the samples. For example, metals, the holding time is 6 months because they're pretty stable and we know there's not a big issue. For VOCs, the holding time is 14 days. So they have to be analyzed within that time frame or the analysis is not valid. And that's a pretty standard time frame that takes into account potential changes with time.
Okay, Rich?
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions for or comments with respect to the last two agenda items of Mr. O'Brien or Dave Johnson? Okay, moving right along. I think at the last meeting a couple months ago, we had a discussion about some outstanding issues kind of slipping by the wayside, not being addressed in a timely manner. I know that Ms. Lampert has sent out one email in particular that was pretty extensive with respect to questions that are still hanging out there. I know today Pine took a crack at trying to condense those down into a smaller, more defined list, and she sent that out earlier. Anybody have any comments or input with respect to, do you have any outstanding questions? Like to get a document going so that it's constantly being, updated and we're not, we're addressing these things in a timely manner as we move forward. So if anybody has any input with respect to, Pine, you shared that document with everyone?
I did, yes, and I'd kind of like to go through, Mary, stepwise, if you wouldn't mind, so we can start off at the top and go down. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, just a comment, Pine, if I may. Jack, I think maybe 2 years ago when this, 2.5 years ago, whatever, when this issue came up, I think you, at one of the NDCAP meetings, you had suggested an administrative process off the top of your head. I can't remember all the specifics, but it made sense at the time. I don't know if you remember what you were suggesting, but just thought I'd throw that out.
Yeah, can I make one quick comment? I think most of the questions went to Pat O'Brien. And so I think going through the list, you could put a PO beside the ones and have Pat just answer them at the next meeting. And that'll cut through.
I think he can answer
Heck of a lot.
tonight if he's allowed to.
Oh, what?
I think he can answer some of them tonight if he's allowed to.
Okay, great.
Sure. I'll walk through what Pine sent. You know, the method to share information, that's what Dave and I was just talking about with the framework. So like I said, you know, we'll look to bring some more information forward. When it comes to the cask warranty, as I've said multiple times, it is 25 years and I'm just trying to pull up one document that has some stuff that I might share, for design material and workmanship. So let me just real quickly share one thing on my screen, just so everyone understands what the system is. I know some of us are very, very intimately ingrained in what the High Storm 100 system that we have here is. So there is that overpack lid that's 19 inches of steel and concrete. The canister lid of the MPC, the multi-purpose canister that holds the fuel bundles, that's approximately 9.5 inches of stainless steel. Those are the representative assemblies. The basket, which is stainless steel and metamic neutron absorber. The canister, which is a 1/2 inch of stainless steel, and then the overpack itself, which is approximately 27 inches of steel and concrete. So I know the question was asked about concrete, and I've said multiple times when asked, you know, if someone wants to try to get the warranty, please make that request of our legal department down in Camden at Holtec. But just so people understand, this concrete is not external. The concrete is in between the inner and outer steel shells and not external to the system. This picture right here is a top-down view of the high storm overpacks at our manufacturing facility. And the yellow arrows show where that concrete is poured going into the inner basket area up against this inner basket here, which would be the one that holds the MPC inside. So just wanted people to kind of understand that this is a graphic that I used recently in New York at the New York NDCAP, just to kind of help potentially explain that. For the soil sample question, when we did the construction of the newest VISI pad, there was some soil removal. It is still on site. It is on the what we would call the industrial side of the plant, which is where the site characterization is underway and working through. So that piece specifically, I know that question was asked, I think, before we ever talked about site characterization. So that'll be part of the site characterization study for this part of the licensed property, this 140 acres. We spoke on the emergency training piece earlier, and I'll defer to Sam on the little sub question about the all hazards plan if she wants to answer. If not, I don't want to put you on the spot, Sam.
Oh, I'm happy to. So the all hazards plan, chapter 639, requires that each municipality designate an emergency management director and that they also have a plan, an emergency operations plan. So our regional offices work very closely with local communities to develop those plans. We also are required by that same legislation to have the same comprehensive emergency management plan at the Commonwealth level. And Executive Order 144 requires that our state partner agencies all participate through what's called the emergency support function. And, you know, we have designated roles and responsibilities for how we handle crisis. When we wrote to the NRC expressing some concern about the elimination of the EPZ and just that some tactical level planning was helpful, what also, even though it was denied, and that's a consistent, a consistent position across every decommissioning nuclear power facility. It's not like something unique happened at Pilgrim. One of the things that we lost that's really difficult for us to replace at the Commonwealth level is the evaluation program, the FEMA, the Radiological Emergency Preparedness Program that the Federal Emergency Management Agency oversees. And then it requires exercises and plans. And what we need to do now is, and what we are doing is just sort of stitching together both our all hazards plans and then working very closely with communities. But the 5 communities that were formerly part of the EPZ will have a hard time, frankly, meeting some of the requirements because of, the agreements that they've worked out and the, lack of funding, and some of the infrastructure has also been dismantled. So, I think our ongoing quarterly meetings with the Pilgrim Working Group are helpful and supposed to continue to elevate public safety issues. The training is a good example of that. But that's sort of a high-level summary of where we are in this phase until all spent fuel is on the pad.
What about until it leaves the pad?
I'm
Leaves
sorry,
the
I didn't
site?
catch that, Mary. Say that again?
What about the issue until it leaves the site? Because there are concerns, particularly security issues. And so until it heads out off-site, we aren't clear.
So
And
there's
I'm sure you
ongoing-
appreciate that. Until
Yeah.
all, yeah.
Yeah, and there's ongoing security drill requirements that will happen. Frankly, MEMA's a little less involved in that. We're not a security agency. We are a sort of more.
I meant
disaster-
emergency planning in case something goes wrong.
Yep. Mhm. But those drills will continue. And I mean, Pat has a team of, there's a security, but I know a lot of the issues that have been raised at the NDCAP on barriers and kind of missile attack these asphyxie, those are not within my technical expertise.
No, but the point being, if there remains a probability, no matter how small, of a security issue, which is probably the biggest issue until it leaves the site, that would then require, if worst case happened, for emergency response. And so then that's back into your world.
Yep, but that's what, I mean, the same could be said. So I think the best way to think about this is sort of functionally versus necessarily hazard specific. I mean, the similar strategies about needing to potentially evacuate a community or shelter a community, provide emergency communications and rapid notifications to the public, are things that we would do kind of regardless of the type of hazard, but really fall back to that, functional approach to emergency management planning. And that's what we work very closely with the local communities on.
Dave?
I'm sorry, if I could, just even after all the fuel is on the pad, we continue with annual emergency planning exercises. Those exercises demonstrate our ability to be able to work with Plymouth Fire, make required notifications to the state for either a security event or a postulated cask failure event. And those remain for as long as the fuel is on the pad.
Your grandkids, right, Dave?
Be a good job for him, maybe.
Richard?
Yeah, I just want to follow up with Sam. I had an outstanding question that I didn't see on Mary and Pine's list we're going back about a year, maybe a little more than a year, when the EPZ was going to be shrunk down to the site boundary in April of 2020. But I remember we were discussing, the NDCAP was discussing the potential need to continue with the emergency calendar until such time all the spent fuel was put on the pad. And Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought MEMA had an interest in exploring that possibility. And then COVID hit, we didn't have meetings. I think it fell into a crack somewhere. Do you have any, was it resolved internally between MEMA and the other agencies in Holtec?
Rich, I lost a word in there. You said emergency calendar?
Yeah, the annual Entergy, every year the EPZ communities, every resident business would receive the calendar.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, that's what I'm referring to.
Yeah, the settlement agreement requires that there's kind of information shared publicly via websites. So the plant is responsible. We've also edited our website. We are not we are not carrying on with the calendar.
Okay, so that's how it got resolved.
So is that a point that I need to add to a list, Rich, or is that satisfied?
Well, I don't know. It's I guess if that it's part of the settlement agreement. So whether people agree or disagree with how it came out, that's the way it is right now. So it's, I guess the question's resolved.
All right. Pine, did you ever start going through that list?
Yeah,
So-
I was,
Where
I was
were
about,
you?
I was about 3/4 of the way through, John, the last
Yeah,
one.
I'm doing good. We're after, at the,
The temporary rad waste transfer area.
Legos.
Yeah, that was the last one I could speak to, and then I'll kick it back. But so again, similar answer to have about the asphyxie piece is that is on this 140 acres of the industrial side. We are obviously doing site characterization work around that. Understand that the characterization work and the final work before we would ever release the property, we will go through and do the sampling, and then obviously ensure that data is correct. So that will have to be part of the decommissioning. Obviously, removing that once that is no longer a temporary temporary staging area. But that's all part of the iterative process of the site characterization.
So did everybody get that? We're talking about the temporary staging area where everything that's up to greater than Class C waste is stored before it is loaded off-site and transported to places unknown. And the question was, when are you gonna sample that? And what Patrick, I think, is saying is, after all that stuff is taken apart, we're going to sample it as part of the site.
Yeah, I mean, we'll sample it. Jack, I know could probably speak more to direct sampling, but I know we'll sample around that area as we go through the process. It's part of that characterization. But feel free, Jack. You know more than I do on that.
Just a leftover question. Go for it.
I would just say, historically, that was a non-radiologically impacted area where that is set up. That's not an area that has underground piping and such. That would be a concern. And we have been sampling through there historically as part of the tritium monitoring. We know the direction of the subterranean water flow. We know that we did not have positive tritium samples from the wells at that storage area. So I'm, of course, as Pat said, once they demobilize that area, it'll be required to be sampled. But as it sits now, it's not an area of concern for myself and my staff. Did that help?
But the answer is it'll be tested when it's all taken apart.
My answer is it's been tested before, and when it's all taken apart, we'll make sure that area or Holtec will sample that area and kind of recharacterize that smaller area to make sure it's clean before it's released as unrestricted. They have to demonstrate that to my agency.
Great. Perfect. Thank you, Pat.
No problem.
Fine. Anything else on that list?
So the remaining questions I got from the previous meetings were, are we going to have the work groups continue? Like the site cleanup and restoration group or other groups? That was a question that was unanswered as far as I could tell. I'm not lobbying for anything.
I am. I think Jack Priest made a very good point a meeting or two ago, that over the next 2 years, the major focal point is the site cleanup. And I would think a group would get together and seriously look at the historical site assessment and analyze it, and look at what's coming up in March and make recommendations as opposed to let it all slip by. Because they cannot be done once a month in a 20-minute agenda item. I mean, that's just my opinion. But I think it's something to consider that, let's face it, what are the three biggies? Site cleanup, which is the focus now, spend fuel, security, and safety, and finances. Those are the biggies.
Anybody else?
Just want to add, Mary, I think when the subject came up or the topic came up the other year, that, and I think Dave Johnson gave a quick summary of his impression of the benefit of keeping the SCNR from, I guess, a meeting, a group meeting you had earlier that day of an NDCAP meeting.
Well, I think, I don't know if you're
part of the constraint
directing a
about some of the
question.
working. Oh, no, I'm just, I'm not directing a question, just a little quick history. I think part of the challenge of having work group meetings, this is pre-Zoom, was just trying to find the time and place to have these meetings. And I think the consensus seemed to be, I forget if there was any votes taken, but I think the consensus is that other than your working group, Pine, that there weren't going to be any other working group meetings for the time being. But if we're going to be living in a Zoom society, even after we're able to meet at town hall in the future again, post COVID-19, that might have an impact too on need or appropriateness for other work group meetings that could be developed if that had to be, aside from the ones that Mary mentioned. So I just wanted to throw that ancient history out there, just food for thought.
So I remember when I offered my opinion on this a ways ago, my opinion was that we ought to have a thoughtful process for deciding if we needed work groups. Maybe that's what this dialogue is beginning to be. And there was, at the point that I was weighing in, there were some folks sort of offering their opinion that we should just keep all the work groups that we had, and I didn't agree with that. I would, I mean, I think if we're, going to think about work groups, obviously they are a burden on the agencies, that's what they are, but we're going to do what we got to do to make this process work for folks. But I think we should evaluate this meeting first. And, Mary, I think overviewed, very nicely kind of the four things that are of interest, the finances, and I'll probably miss one of them, Mary, but the site assessment, the finances, the security, and I think the long-term storage. So I would just, wonder if we could maybe accomplish a lot of that in this setting here. The Holtec folks give an update every month on how they're progressing on the site assessment, and I would wonder if we could look at restructuring this group so that it was a bit more focused, and I don't mean that, but a bit more focused perhaps into the four major interest areas, and see if we can't use this group really productively. I think I'm finding it at least to be evolving into a pretty nice interactive setting that provides a lot of information, I think. Additionally, I noticed we have 38 folks on this call, and I think those folks benefit from our making this this group meeting as effective as possible.
I totally agree with your sentiment. However, how could, in this 2-hour meeting, have a serious discussion, an analytical discussion on the HSA? What they got right, why people think they got things wrong, what was missing, blah, blah, blah. And with documentation to back up what people have to say. That's a different focus that you can't have in this type of group. Now, you might say it's not necessary and one can do it by email. If that be the case, fine. You see what I'm saying?
I do. And, you know, I think I'd like to maybe also put the co-chair and the chair on the spot a little bit here. You know, every month we work together with the chair and the co-chair and the interagency work group to look at coming up with an agenda. And, you know, I think they've been a little more challenged to come up with now that we have the settlement agreement. You know, we have a template for doing this work. And we had a lot of work to do before developing that template. And I think this group was really effective in doing that. But we do have a template now. And I think what's in front of us is assessment and cleanup. And, you know, we've spent an awful lot of time talking about the casks and security. And I think, you know, there's certainly some value in continuing that dialogue. You know, I don't know how much more information we're going to get on those casks. You know, we've been talking about those casks for 3 years, and they're the same casks we started talking about 3 years ago. So, you know, from my perspective, we talk about security, certainly, but I think this group could spend a good deal of this time talking about site assessment, you know, the work that is being done to assess, the work that's going to need to be done to address the site. You know, this project now is going to go on for another, you know, 8 to 10 years. And the assessment, it's not light speed. You know, you take samples, you wait a couple of weeks and the sample data comes back. And then you do the quality assurance, quality control on the samples. That takes a couple of weeks. And then you develop some kind of draft report. And then you try to figure out what the data tells you. So you know, it's not a light speed process, and I'm not certain that we need a lot more meetings to really get into the kind of detail that I think we'd all like to get into. That is my opinion. I mean, other folks are going to have different opinions.
Well, one thing that's going to hit our group probably in 2022, we have the PSDAR, but the NRC, if they're on time this time, I think we were expecting the NRC to come out with its revised decommissioning regulations that could be retroactive. Also, the plant's currently undergoing decommissioning. So I don't know at this time, maybe Mary has some more insight on this, how much the new decommissioning regulations, the revised decommissioning regulations, could impact the things we're doing. And if it's something that is going to be handled between Holtec, the Attorney General's office, and the IWG, that's one thing. But then we just get informed about, the NDCAP gets informed about, okay, of the 30 new provisions there that affect decommissioning, 5 apply to Pilgrim, and of these 5 and so forth and so on. But I'm not suggesting we have a new working group or an updated PSDAR working group, but there are things that are going to be happening like that that could call for a little bit more intensive review by the NDCAP. Not this year, but next year.
Well, I'm happy to concentrate for the next several months on the site assessment because, as EJ pointed out, we're about to get a lot of information, and focusing on that as a group, I think, is the way we want to go, since we've been spending a lot of time aimed at that direction. And let me see a show of hands on how many people have read the HSA. 2, 3, 4, all 500 pages.
Underlined.
Speed readers.
Thank you. I actually like Dave's. I like Dave's suggestions. I like the idea of focusing on. I'd prefer 3 rather than 4 particular items. and having just a report on finances. I don't know that we can do battle over finances.
I don't think finance is gonna come in until,
So
we're essentially finished in 8 years.
let's not
And
get,
we get into spent fuel.
No, I think we should ask for an annual report out to see if they're following what their targets on spending were.
We
for the
do that,
previous year.
and we're required by the NRC to provide that by the end of March every year. So that is something that will publicly come out annually.
Right, so I mean, that would be a good agenda item to see, are they following their spend down curve?
Yeah,
And cross-reference their spend down curve to where they're at with milestones, right? Because it's a major project. Some things get moved up on the schedule that could affect their spending curve. Things get pushed off on the schedule, like for weather. So, just to give us a pin on the map of where we are at that particular time, I think would satisfy the financial reporting requirements to the NDCAP.
Yeah, and I think to Jack's point, I think DJ and Jack and I lived it pretty regularly. But as part of that agreement with the Attorney General, there's certain requirements for funding to stay in the decommissioning trust fund, and there's certain triggers time-wise. One, I think, is partial site release, and the other is, I believe, fuel on pad. But I'd have to double check. But there's certain requirements there to ensure that there's enough funds available to do the work that's scheduled.
Mr. Chair, I'm ready to move on if you are.
Okay. All right, moving on to the next agenda item. And
what about the warranty? Oh, we talked about that, sorry.
I think Dave Johnson had some great comments as a segue into this next topic. So the next topic, agenda item number 7, is setting future meetings and having a discussion about maybe going to an every 2-month meeting schedule. And I certainly appreciate Dave's comments, especially the state employees who participate here. I don't want to burden them with any unnecessary tasks. We know that, everybody is extremely busy in their lives, especially, in the midst of a pandemic. We just want to come in here, be as efficient as possible, and in an open and transparent manner, discuss the primary 3 to 4 issues around this entity and dispense that information to the public to the best of our ability. So anything we can do to streamline that, I'm on board with. So having said that, I'll open that up to Pine, the vice chair, or anybody else who wants to comment on this. Pine, you got anything now? Or?
Well, I just, I know that March and May are going to be pretty heavy with site assessment information. I expect we'll have some information back in terms of the analysis in March, but that by May we should have a report ready that we can look at. Is that right, Pat? Where are you, Pat?
I'm right here. It was projected. I think it's the LSP is required by May 31st to do the final.
Okay, so
John Drabinski, if he's still on, he might have dropped off. He would know. Oh, John, you're still on there. You know what the timeline is exactly? I think you're still on mute, John, but I think you said yes, that's right. So I'm assuming my May 31st date was correct.
Does that
It is, Pat.
Does that mean we would have to wait till July to talk about it, or can you talk about it before the report is actually?
I can ask Mark Lawson that directly. I don't know how much, I know the draft report is end of March. So I don't know, just honestly, I don't know offhand. But let me find out sooner rather than later, and I'll get back with you upon exactly what.
Because I know these dates are like the 22nd of each month. I think is the way we looked at them for avoiding holidays and other sorts of interferences with Monday meetings. I believe it's still the 4th Monday. Go ahead, Dave.
Dave?
So a couple things there. I just want to make the distinction when we talk about deadlines and, you know, John and Pat and Dave are referencing the March deadline for a report and their May deadline for a more mature report. I just want to point out that those are Holtec CDI's internal goals. I think they're worthy goals, and we certainly want to be supportive of those goals. But unless somebody who is as familiar with the settlement agreement as I am wants to correct me, I do not believe that those are settlement agreement goals. And the reason I'm raising that is because the way the settlement agreement works is that the interagency work group offers their comments, which we talked earlier about the fact that we want to try to get those together, hopefully by March, or at least certainly, you know, be able to start talking a little bit more about where things are in March based on the draft data that's coming in the draft report. But that starts a 30-day clock, and that clock might circle back and end up at May. I don't know. But, you know, ultimately, the interagency work group is going to need to approve this environmental site assessment. And, you know, that approval may or may not coincide with Holtec CDI's goal of May. You know, certainly everybody wants to keep this thing moving so long as it's, you know, we're doing the job like we all want to do the job. And I think that could be done by May. But I just want to be clear relative to when we talk about May, what May is. And then, you know, from my perspective, when we talk about the idea of potentially bringing this group to something like every other month, you know, as it stands now, I think we meet 10 times. So that would be a reduction of, I think, you know, 3 or 4 times a year potentially. I think that really needs to go along with sorting out the information so that folks know where to go to look at things. You know, they're not frustrated by waiting for 2 months to hear updates. They're, you know, looking at data. You know, they're thinking on things so that when we do get together, we've got a really tight and focused meeting. And I think we can do that. But, you know, and that's where, you know, Pat and I have been talking about trying to get this information out there in the right way so that it's digestible and it's accessible. And you know, we're not ready to say what that is tonight. You know, we do intend to get there. So I think that's where I think those things go hand in hand.
So what do people think about March, May, July, September, November? That's the question. Are those, is that just, you know?
I just want to understand one thing. I just want to understand what David was just saying. For example, if draft documents were being issued and we're not meeting, as long as if it's sent to the NDCAP as a minimum internally, just for information, as long as we're not discussing anything outside of a meeting where it's, you know, in a quorum size, then maybe we don't have to meet as frequently. And if it turned out that a number of people contacting John or Pine says, you know, we can't wait for another month to have our scheduled bi-monthly meeting. We need to call a meeting a little bit sooner there, and maybe so be it. But we could certainly still be receiving, I assume we could still be receiving information and documentation as long as we're not debating or discussing it, that keep the open meeting law folks happy.
I agree with Rich on that. I think as long as we don't communicate with each other too much via email, as long as we're getting the information, I think that might work.
Mary?
I couldn't disagree more heartily. Part of the charter of the NDCAP is to educate and communicate with the public. This is not a closed circle. I think once a month is not too much of a burden for members so that the public can become more educated, more engaged, which is part of the charter of this group. Also, nobody has a crystal ball to know what is going to come up when. And so, for example, if the May report on the site cleanup, the plan, and what's in the plan is what you're going to look for. What's in the plan doesn't come until the end of May, then it's important that that be distributed and you have a meeting in June. Who knows what else is going to come up? But don't forget that you just aren't here to circulate documents to members and exclude input and output to the public.
I understand exactly what you're saying, Mary. I'd also point out that our charter, when it was put together via legislation, was only that we met quarterly. So we've done that. I think before the AG agreement, there was a lot of information to present and provide. But I would say after the AG's agreement, there's a number of things that we've outlined and streamlined going forward. Obviously, I'm here to support it. I'm supporting the New York NDCAP, and when Michigan comes, I'll be over there too. So I understand and appreciate and want to provide as much information to the public as possible. I'm just pointing it out that when you talk about what the charter was, one of the things that was in the charter was it was only quarterly as well.
True. And I remember the first meeting, as we all do, and it had it not been for Sean Mullen, this would have been a total joke. And so talking about streamlining, I do not want to streamline the public out of the process. And as I'm sure you don't either.
No, I know exactly what you're saying, and I would agree that I want as much public input as possible. You know that I live here, and I'll be here for a long time. I just look at the fact that as these projects get going, other states have gone to quarterly. Vermont is now quarterly. So these projects are, once there's agreement in place at a state level as to what the site restoration cleanup is for a project, these start to slow down because they're very much more.
Let's see what public input is at the conclusion of this meeting. There's public here on the telephones. Let's see what they have to say.
Understand it's the same public that we have at every month's meeting. It's usually not more than 15 people. A handful of them are, media outlets. And I understand, but I just see what our public participation really is. And it's probably less than 10 people every month.
Well, that'll be less and less.
Once you take out, kind of what my staff is that listens in on these meetings and what the media is, you're really down to a handful of people. And I'm not saying that's the right thing. I'm just saying that's the reality and the truth of what we're dealing with.
So therefore, if you make the meetings less, public input will be less and less and less. And so therefore, it's an insider's game.
No, I would disagree with that in the sense that I think if you made them less frequent, and honestly, I don't care one way or the other. If you make them less frequent, you can make them more thorough and robust, because this is some of the conversations I've had with Pine. If these weren't so, I think our last meeting was 25 days ago. Looking at what our project schedule is for the next year, we're moving fuel for the next year. That's really it. So my updates every month going forward are going to be that we're moving fuel and we're doing a little bit more demo. There's not as much to present about the project. So it's really difficult to say every month we need to have a meeting. There is more time, I think, if we do planning, which is something I know Sean had done in previous, was we looked to plan. Who are we having? What are the issues and what do we want to do? And that's something Pine and I have discussed at a higher level with some of her ideas as to how can we plan these and make these more effective so that they are more interesting, so that there is more public input.
Well, I think one way to make it more interesting would be having guest speakers. Like I would like to see Dave Lockbaum, for example, to come up and have a discussion on spent fuel with someone from Holtec. I mean, that's an example. I can well see having guest speakers come and talk about issues with site cleanup. So I think you can develop in educational interest. We haven't had somebody up from the NRC. So I can see making them interesting in that sense. Not just interesting. I mean, having the governor was this foolish idea, but not that I don't like the governor, but I mean, really. But, you know, there are ways to have substantive material. There is a discussion going on, for example, up in Vermont, it will happen on May 15th, on how their subcommittee came out on whether the state is in favor of consolidated interim siting. Is this something we've talked about here? No. I mean, there is a multiplicity of interest. Maybe I should read more novels or something, you know, take up gardening. I don't know, but
Well,
Mary,
Mary, the topic that you just mentioned, maybe that's something that you'd like to see, you know, brought up at the next meeting. You can put that on as an agenda item and introduce that to the group.
Yeah, interim storage is something that Pine had brought to my attention as to something that we might want to have. And I did reach out to the NRC to see if there would be someone appropriate that could speak to that at a high level, understanding that there's 2 consolidated interim storage facilities that are under licensing and court action, and they might be muted on what they can actually say publicly. But these are the type of things, if we could get them on, I'm more than willing to help reach out to people I know in the industry to help bring these people, as Mary says, guest speakers. I know she has her panel of experts that she could reach out to as well and make these more, you know, interactive.
So my point is there's a lot that can be done to educate the panel and also the public. I think it's a very important issue. I'm going to be 80 soon, so I mean I'm not going to be around long. So Pat, count your blessings.
I don't wish ill will on anyone. I just know that I'll be the one here that I have the 7-month-old at home. He's going to be dealing with this long after I'm no longer here.
So can we get Kevin in here and a couple other people that have things to say?
Kevin, go ahead.
No, I'm all set. I think I agree with Rich said, and I was going to point out what the charter originally said. And we all remember that that crazy meeting that we first had at Plymouth South when there wasn't any intention or interest in having another meeting for another year. So, you know, not speaking for Sean, I think we've handled a lot with the monthly meetings, but I would not be opposed if we spread them out a little bit.
Anyone else?
I just want to follow up on what I was suggesting previously. I certainly don't have a problem keeping the monthly meetings. I understand what Patrick is saying about there's times we're just not going to have a lot of new things to talk about. I mean, when we get into the nuts and bolts with the site assessment and the sampling's done, and you know, certainly there could be a lot of flurry of things going on at that time. But I mean, back in November, I think I was suggesting maybe a topic for discussion along the lines of educating our panel as well as the public would be determining how clean is clean, the process. It's kind of connected the site cleanup there too. And yeah, I know we could go to the manuals and I'll read about that stuff, the 500 pages there, but that could be done just about any subject or topic for that matter. You know, certainly I'm in favor of seeing between the nuts and bolts of decommissioning the site, these various topics of potential interest that are going to affect, you know, it's part of the decommissioning, but also part of I think what the community is concerned about too.
But part of being a panel member is when you have an idea, you have to develop that idea, do some work for that idea, and then bring that idea as a formed presentation. I mean, there's a lot of ways to bring education to the panel and the public. We could have a webinar with Dave Lockbaum without drawing everybody into the same 2-hour session. It actually could do that. It doesn't have to be, the panel can produce information, develop information, and offer it in education without requiring all of these people at a meeting for 2 hours. That was all I was saying. There's plenty to do in between time. I'm not suggesting that in the interim, nothing is done. All I'm suggesting is I'm not getting a lot of help making up the meeting agenda, and that if we concentrate on the work at hand and make those meetings focused on that work, that we all may get more out of it, including the public. That was the thought behind the process. If you guys want to meet every month, that's fine. Step up with agenda items. We're all volunteers here.
Any other comments?
Yeah, we have some questions in the chat when you're ready for them, Chair.
Sure, go ahead. You want me to? Are these people participating? You just want me to read the questions?
I've got 2 hands in the air. Let me just find out who they are first.
All right.
Point of order.
Henrietta.
All right, Jack, go ahead. Point of order.
Point of order. We haven't resolved the question on the agenda of the meeting schedule.
You don't want the public to talk to that? That's what they're raising their hands about.
Well, they don't have, ultimately, they're not going to have
All right, I'm fine with that. Decide.
All right, so Jack, I mean, resolving the current issue in front of us for either there's a motion or there's not a motion on the issue, correct?
Someone needs to make a motion to move the meetings to 2 months and we vote on the motion.
I'll move it just for the process.
Okay, so Patrick, your motion is what? Meeting again in March and then thereafter every other month?
Correct, yeah, well, I'll make that motion.
Is there a second to the motion?
Can I add an amendment?
Is there a second to the motion?
For discussion, I'll second it. So Mary can make her amendment.
Okay, Kevin O'Reilly seconded. We're opening the floor to discussion.
I amend that we hold off until members of the public who wanted to make a comment did so and then take the vote.
Jack, you an expert on Robert's rules?
That was Mary's rule.
I know.
Yeah, you can, so I think.
You're not really amending the motion, or.
She's making a second motion, I believe.
Yeah. Okay, so any other discussion on the current motion in front of the group?
Move the question.
Okay, I just want to say one thing. I don't think it would ever, if it ever got to the point in time where there was an issue that came up that elevated to the point where we needed to call an emergency meeting, I'm sure Ms. Dubois and myself could figure that out, with input from some other members. And if we had to call a meeting, I think we still retain the autonomy to do so. Mary Waldron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to acknowledge both your effort along with Pine's effort. You have reached out to us as panelists a number of times to solicit information, to get us engaged. It is busy in terms of everybody holding full-time jobs. I just wanted to acknowledge the effort that you've made. I think that was previously stated, is that you have these collaboration to talk about topics, not only just with us, but with HOTEC and others. And I certainly am interested always in educating myself. So I've been on this panel for probably about a year just now, and that learning curve is huge. But I've been given documents from my predecessor to look at, to educate myself. If I have a question, I know I can reach out to both you and to Pine or to anybody else on this panel. I do think that you do have the same attendees. I would offer that it's important to hear the public. It is, nowadays during COVID, trying to get people engaged, and whether it's a repetitive question or not, I think that we do need to be able to be transparent. So with that, I know that's for maybe another topic, but on the topic of us and how often we meet, I avail myself, I keep these meetings as a hold on my schedule, and we'll do that for whatever we decide to go every other month, every 3 months. The particular, I will have this date scheduled and to be available as a panelist to be engaged and do the research that I need to on my own.
John Flores, did I hear you say something earlier?
Yeah, my thought was that, having been on this advisory board since the beginning, I mean, initially we had a lot of work to do in terms of putting together the various subcommittees and really listening to what the NRC was recommending, what we were recommending as a whole. But now that we've sort of reached the settlement, I would go back to what Dave said earlier in terms of, when you think about security, you think about assessment, and you think about the cleanup, perhaps maybe, another category that someone might bring up. I think that probably should be our focus as we move forward. And the necessity of having a meeting every month, I think it really comes down to personal opinion. I think we get a lot done every month, but I'm not suggesting that having a meeting every other month, based on the fact that we don't have, what I'm hearing, enough criteria to establish a running agenda, if you will. It sounds like we're looking at things to make up in order to validate the purpose of having a meeting. And maybe it does make sense to have bi-monthly meetings, knowing that if there's a particular issue, a particular concern that comes up, we hold a special meeting. There's something that says we can't. So just my thoughts. I would not hesitate to support a bi-monthly meeting.
Okay, anything else under discussion? Okay, I'm gonna call for a vote. All those in favor of Mr. O'Brien's motion, raise your hand.
Aye, this is Dave on the phone.
I'm sorry, Pine, you getting this? One, two.
So that's Dave Nichols.
Dave Nichols.
Patrick, John, Rich. Paul, are you? I can't see your hand if you're got it up.
No.
John Moylan, Dave Johnson, Kevin O'Reilly, Sam Phillips, Susan Whitaker, Jack Priest, Robert Jones, Mary Waldron. Wait a second, sorry. Who did I miss? Anybody? Did I miss?
You get John Flores?
Rich Rothstein and John Flores, yeah. But I can't call and count too, so you have to count.
You get Grassy?
I didn't see Grassy, no. Grassy voting yes?
Yes, he's in the affirmative.
Voting yes, okay.
Oh, okay, all those voting against the motion?
Yeah, I got Mary.
Mary?
Hold on a minute.
I think it was Paul.
No, to the chair, I have no hard opinion on this. I'll attend whenever you want, so I'm abstaining.
Okay, so it looks like,
Is that what you're trying to tell me?
yeah, we have one abstention in Paul Smith, and it looks like just one vote against in Mary Lampert.
Okay.
Did we get 11 in the affirmative?
16, hold on, I think there's 17 people, so it's 15-1-1.
Okay, Mr. O'Brien's motion passes.
Thank you for counting. Okay, thank you.
All right, we'll move on to public comment.
Okay, I've got Diane, I'm gonna let you talk, Diane. Ready?
Okay. Well, I'm so disappointed with just what happened here. Totally disappointed. At a time that we need more openness and transparency, and a whole tech person is going to put this forward, and it passes. And I was surprised too, Pine, you said that people weren't getting paid. People are all volunteers. Do Pat and Dave Noyes get paid to be on this?
This is unpaid overtime from me. Everything past 40 hours.
Diane.
Just, and Pat, are you still a registered lobbyist at the State House?
I am.
Okay, all right.
Diane, it was my motion.
Okay, but Holtec jumps right on it. So I'm sorry. You know, at in this day and age, when we need openness and transparency, as a person who's been coming to all these meetings to see this tonight happen, it's really discouraging to me. But I wanted to say too, because the meetings could become very, very informational. I'm working with some folks out in New Mexico who are fighting the Holtec attempted take of their land. There's low-income Latino communities and Native American people who are fighting to stop the Holtec centralized interim storage. And this woman is a fighter, and she would be more than willing to speak to this group and let you know what's happening in her community and how they're really protesting this action. And that would be something perfect for this group, because this is a citizens advisory panel, and it would be great to hear from, you know, other angles.
Diane, are you talking about Leona?
Yep.
I sent her an email. I just have not heard back from her.
Yeah.
Email over a week ago, but I haven't heard back from her. So I am trying to do that. If you have a phone number or something like that.
I do.
That'd be great.
Yeah, she'd be a great person to talk about.
I absolutely think you're correct about that. I do.
Yeah.
And this what just to say, this isn't an effort to be less transparent. It's to be more productive. That's what the effort is. It's to be more productive, not less productive, and to not burn out at the same time. So I respect, and I really like that, but there's just a certain efficiency that we have to strive for. And I think that we can improve our work by doing it this way. And if it shows not to be true, we'll have more meetings. So
I know the Vermont NDCAP just organized a group to look at the dry casks, because the public has been raising concerns about them. So they just formed a committee to look at what's happening. And that's something that this committee could do.
Yeah, and it's also something the public could do and bring to there's nothing that's saying you can't do that, Diane.
Right.
You and me are equal that way. We have the same capacities. So bring that to the group. We're not going to say no. We're not going to say we don't want it.
So if the co-chair is okay, I want to just sort of jump in here, and I really do not want to be argumentative, but I think this is an example where I think Diane's first point is not something this group should be spending time on. I think Diane's second point is something that would be legitimate. I think the focus of this group is to oversee decommissioning of Pilgrim. I don't think we are really intended to, and if the folks haven't followed closely, but if the folks in New Jersey or a particular community in New Mexico is getting pressed by whatever is, causing them stress, I feel bad for that. But I do not think that is for this group to take on. I think, this group is intended to focus on decommissioning Pilgrim. And I think, Diane's point on dry casks, I think there's potentially some value there. But I think as we move forward, we need to be careful to be efficient and focused.
Okay, can I just finish up, Pine? The reason I even bring this up is because Holtec is pushing that this waste is going to be leaving Pilgrim. in Plymouth area. And our major concern in the public, I think, is that it's really not going to go anywhere. So it needs to be stored in the safest, most robust, secure canisters with real security around that place so that the public is safe. And that's our major concern. It's you know, when Holtec had that, I think, Patrick, it was last year, you had a slide that said if everything went well, the waste would be leaving the site in 2024. And to put that kind of slide up might have made the community say, great, we don't really have to think about it too much because Holtec is saying it might be leaving by 2024, when in fact, it's not going to be. And so our concern is people paying attention to this, because right now Plymouth is a nuclear waste dump, and it's going to be for a very long time. And how do you protect the population and the public from that?
Just to touch on what you said, Diane, the slide last year said the earliest a interim storage facility could accept waste is 2024. I've made no indications that that would be when fuel was leaving Pilgrim.
Okay, I took a picture of the slide. I'll send it to you.
Okay.
Okay, anyone outside the public comment, Pine?
Henrietta can talk now. Henrietta.
Yes, thank you. I have to second Diane's feeling of disappointment about what happened tonight, because it's my feeling that I know, mind you, that you are all here on your own time as volunteers, but I feel that already the public has had very little real opportunity to get the kind of information that really would have engaged the people in Plymouth and Duxbury and on the Cape. These meetings they're pretty dense, they're pretty abstruse. And as Mary Waldron pointed out, it's taken her a year. It's a very big learning curve. It's really tough to follow the slew of acronyms and all of the technicalities, but there are some very overriding concerns that are widely shared in the public. They may not know how to sit through an NDCAP meeting without dying. They may not know how to express their concerns, but those concerns are there, and they have everything to do with safety and security. And the issue of dry casks has not really been fully explored. I know that you talk about dry casks in terms of loading the fuel into them, getting the ISFSI pad constructed and all of that, but we've never, since Paul Blanche came a year ago last January and exposed what he considered in a very scholarly and professional way to be defective or insufficient, we have really not followed through on that. And it's an issue I feel still is a yawning gap in the agenda of the NDCAP, the citizens' agenda, the citizens' concerns, not the concerns of the state, not the concerns of Holtec, but the concerns of the few citizens who are really just citizens and not professionally representing something or somebody. I wrote John and Pine about a week ago, a little over a week ago, strongly urging them and you to consider inviting Donna Gilmore to talk about dry casks. She is the founder of the San Onofre's Safety and the intervener in the decommissioning proceedings. And she has made a very, very strong, she's made many, many strong presentations, but she really knows dry casks inside and out. And it would be a service to the members of the NDCAP and to the public to hear what she has to say. And it would not require an airplane ticket, it would just require a Zoom. Likewise, David Lochbaum would be a wonderful person to have. Now, I appreciate Pine's suggestion that this doesn't necessarily have to be within the confines of a 2-hour NDCAP meeting, but it would require help from NDCAP in setting such a thing up. I mean, the important thing is to make it happen and to get the information that these very, very knowledgeable people have, their understanding about the details of dry casks and why the thin-walled Holtec dry casks that are welded and cannot be opened, why these are not sufficient. Now, I'm sure that the Holtec representatives on the NDCAP would not be enthusiastic about this idea, but really it is what the public needs and wants to have the opportunity to understand. So I appreciate that you've given the public time to speak. I'm sorry that we didn't get a chance to speak before you took a vote on the meeting, but I would like to see attention given somehow to the details of the thin walled dry casks.
So Henry.
Yeah.
So Henrietta, I did get your email, and I also was on the, I listened to the 3.5 hours or whatever it was of the NRC hearing where Donna talked. And I feel like that the systems are different and that we need to concentrate on what's happening here. And I'm all about that. So I'm not adverse to learning what Donna has to say or anybody has to say. And I've, because of the good graces of Mary Lampert, I've met David Lochbaum and I like him and I appreciate what he has to say. And I'm certainly interested in having more of his information. So that none of that is beyond the vote that we took tonight. All of that is still possible.
Okay.
And it was not a move to eliminate information. It was a move to facilitate maintaining our energy level at a high rate, I would say.
I appreciate that.
Keep
I
the
understand.
thoughts coming, keep the ideas coming, but don't take offense if we don't. That's the way to go. That's all.
Yeah. Okay. But
that's all.
Speaking to your point about Donna, yeah, it's true. The San Onofre system is not the same as our system. They are related, but not the same. However, Donna has made it her business to understand quite a multiplicity of caste systems. So she really is quite an expert. David Lochbaum can speak very specifically to this system and to the history of casks and containers and NRC regulations. And I think that would be a really valuable presentation. And both David and Donna could tailor their presentations and would presumably tailor their presentations to what's happening at Pilgrim. So I just wanted to reiterate that from the public point of view, the issue of dry casks is not over. It's not even begun. It's not even been fully broached.
Okay.
No, it's
All right,
not.
Henrietta.
We still have James Lampert to speak, okay?
Absolutely, Pine. Move on to Mr. Lampert.
Jim, you're on.
Yeah, you can't hear you.
People hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, that's better. Thanks.
There are a lot of subjects here that kind of run together. But I'd like to start off something maybe on a comparison. Working groups, in my view, got a fairly short shift, and frankly, they didn't get the attention they should have many times when they were going on. But what those working groups did was give the people who were involved in the particular subject, Pat and some of his people, always a couple of people from, I think at that stage, they were typically energy, and members of the public who had spent a lot of time studying specific aspects of this, to get together and talk about them substantively and to ask questions that often actually got an answer. That has been utterly missing in these monthly meetings. These monthly meetings are very good about talking generally about process. They are very bad about getting specific information or giving the opportunity to delve into any depth into a subject. You need more than a presentation. You need a presentation by people who understand what the systems are. And frankly, I would suggest you've got one on the panel. My wife has spent 30 years studying these systems. You don't need an engineering degree, but I've got one if you need it. And you need the people to ask, have you given time to go through and ask the questions and get the answer? We're not getting answers. The public is not getting answers. And without working groups, that frankly, they're not even participating in sufficiently raising.
So are you,
I am suggesting, did you, sure, go ahead. Your turn.
are you suggesting that Mary give a webinar?
No.
Frankly, what I am suggesting is that you get people, and maybe the public, it's not, the question isn't just giving a webinar, that's the problem. The question is getting answers back. The questions that, Pine, you passed on today were not the questions that I largely wrote after spending hours going through the previous example. They are not the specific questions that I would ask now. We need to get answers to questions. Go with the warranty. Who are the parties to the warranty, Pat? And don't give me Holtec, because that's just a big group. What specific companies?
I'd have to check, but I know it's two Holtec entities because it's owned by Holtec and it's supplied by Holtec.
But what specific entities? Because Holtec International doesn't stand behind that warranty. So I don't understand how you say that Holtec broadly will be responsible. We need information on that.
Again, I've told you, Jim, when you've asked, please reach out to our legal counsel to attain the warranty.
You know what? I'm not going to talk to your legal counsel, Pat. I'm going to ask you specific, factual, non-legal questions. And if you don't, Holtec doesn't want to answer those questions, that's Holtec's business. But the panel needs to know specifically what Holtec was asked, and frankly, that it refused to answer. These aren't legal issues, they're factual questions. And there are slews of these.
Okay.
What I'm suggesting is that if you're not going to put working groups together, you've got to blow up the system, the agendas that you've basically been using for these meetings, and come up with an agenda where you can get people who have knowledge, who want to talk about things, and can ask questions and get answers. Get answers from Dave, get specific answers from Jack. Those answers were forthcoming at working group country meeting. They were forthcoming from Patrick. They were forthcoming from Dave Noyes. I haven't seen any of that in these meetings.
All right, Pine, anyone else out there in public?
Not on, no one's raising their hands. One's raising their hands. I see Rich Rothstein raising his though.
I'd like to just try to cut to the chase. And I'm going to go back even since 2005 when I was on the Nuclear Matters Committee. So been there, done a lot of this, and a lot of this kind of issues I'm hearing came up all the time. Senator Wolf, before he stepped down last fall, would say more than often, we just don't have all the technical expertise we need as a panel. And I'm not trying to take anything away from Mary, myself, Rich Grassi, Paul Smith, who professionally delved into a number of things, for example, that we get into there. My understanding was that the original legislation was to allow this panel to be able to hire, retain experts. And I know this is something that I think you brought up, Pine and John, with our state officials in a letter last late summer when we were talking about this whole thing. And I think that if we could bring in, I'm sure Lockbaum would do this gratis there, but if we could have a group of experts that we could call upon, and the incentive to be that they could get paid, and we could have the monies to pay them there, then we could engage in some of these issues and discussions that I hear Diane bringing up periodically and others. But we're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place right now as far as that aspect goes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes, a point of information for the chair, and this goes back to something the good Mr. Johnson previously suggested. In order for us to make progress with the decommissioning, decontamination, restoration of Pilgrim Station, I think it's important that we recognize the boundaries of this committee and just what our purview is. We have two authority figures, the Department of Public Health and the Department of Environmental Protection, Mr. Johnson and Mr. Priest. They sit on the committee with us. One of our goals should be not to distract them, but to let them do their job. Is the HSA satisfactory? Is it adequate? That's before them. Okay, when we do the site characterization after the site sampling, that's going to provide an independent verification and validation of the HSA. So the whole thing is done by process. Now, whether the fuel canisters should be ½ inch thick or whether they should be thicker than that, that is not something that this committee is going to have an input on, I don't believe. Now, maybe that's a discussion for the committee, but I think that's something that goes before the NRC. That's something that's evaluated by those topical experts with the NRC. So that's all I want to say. I certainly sympathize with the public's request for, but why would the NDCAP view, okay, something that would be a distraction for those authority members of the committee? That's just my opinion. Thank you.
Well, I must admit, my mother used to believe whatever the doctor said, he was the expert and you follow him. Now, whether the doctor said to take thalidomide, it was all right. Well, I think we learned that it's good to question respectfully authority and to do some research. So I think the public can find, just as this committee can find, facts, actually to read hard the HSA, make comment, ask questions, ask Jack, ask Dave, ask others. I've sent it off to some outside experts, what they thought, to try to responsibly gather facts. And I think that's what this committee should want to do. And I think that's what the public who are interested in this would want to contribute. And so there can be a good discussion, but I do agree with my husband that maybe in a subcommittee working group format, you could really get further and then bring it back to this committee. But everybody has their interests and time schedules and other calls on their time.
Yeah, I just.
Dave and then Paul.
Yeah, so sorry, Paul. And I hear Jim's comments and Mary too on the working groups. And I think I've made my opinion pretty clear on the working groups. But I do think, hopefully, you guys find, and I think I speak for all the Interagency work group members on this work group, and it's 3 or 4 of us at least, I think more than that. We try to answer the questions the same, whether it's this group or the work groups. The answers are not going to be any different. So, so I would say, ask the question. I'm hoping that we will take this NDCAP and get it to be a little more focused. Again, not meaning it's not effective now, but really, if we've got to drill down on something, let's drill down on it. And, we'll answer the questions as best we can. And the answers aren't going to be any different. If we're sitting in a room with 10 people, not on PAC, or if we're sitting in a room with all of us on PAC, the answers are the answers. So, so I think we ought to try to give this process a chance to work.
Paul Smith.
If I could, through the chair, certainly, Mr. Johnson, I totally agree with you. Ms. Lampert, I respect your opinion. We should question authority. My point is that with the makeup of the NDCAP committee that we do have, a question as to the adequacy of the thickness of the container of the dry fuel inside the cask is not a question that should go before the NDCAP. That is a question that is more appropriate to go before the NRC. That's my point. We should recognize those things that we have knowledge of, that we have control of, and we should address those. I think that's the logic that I'm seeing coming from the group. That's how I think the MARSIMS project process works. That's what the governor intended. And it is only my opinion. I'm not trying to say, don't ask any question that one wants, but recognize those that you can answer, those that you can control.
I'm not disagreeing, but in response to the discussion of thin versus thicker cast, my point would be, we've crossed that bridge. We already have these casts, and there's no way to change their clothes technologically now. However, if this board decided to address it, they might, in their recommendations, recommend to the governor that, for example, advocating for monies for hot cells. So if need be, the canisters closed could be changed. They could recommend, there could be recommendations. That's a different slant. Because I think also this board makes recommendations, if we could ever get a vote, to the governor and to the legislature. I mean, I just took that as an example.
All right, anyone else? And does anyone have any, go ahead, Rich.
Just real quick, a year ago, January, when Mr. Blanche gave his presentation, I remember asking the question about double wall canisters and the fact that they're going to be used in Russia. And I think at the time, Patrick, correct my memory, but I think in terms of, I asked questions, would these possibly be able to be used at Pilgrim? And I think at the time you're saying, well, your Holtec was planning to submit information to the NRC to get license approval to use that in the United States. But what Mary was just saying, it sounds like even if you did get the approval from the NRC, that maybe it'd be too late to use those on the existing casts that are on the pad, but not necessarily the spent fuel to go into casks. I don't think we got an update on that in terms of where things stand, but I just wanted to close the loop a little bit on what I recall.
Yeah, you're right, Rich. They are not licensed in the U.S. We have not pushed forward to get that system licensed. You know, what I can speak to is the Holtec system that we have here. You know, there's more than 1,500 loaded casks by Holtec in the world, and it's not just the NRC. We have 10 other regulatory agencies around the world that have approved this design for use. So it is robust. It is something that is widely used across the industry. So I understand there's always thought processes to push forward and see the next best, newest thing, but this is proven technology that we have here. And like I said, I've said in the past, I live in town. I stand next to these casks. I'm not worried about the safety of these casks. And again, I think back to the point, it is something for the NRC. If that's the concerns that this panel or any individual has, that's where this lies with, is the NRC.
Okay, wrapping up and moving on to the last agenda item, specifically for the March meeting. Does anybody have any topics they'd like to see as an agenda item for March?
The
Okay.
site is-
All right, there's a couple of weeks here. If you've got any great ideas, you want to have, go ahead, Pine.
I forgot something that I was supposed to bring to, and I sent it to you with the agenda last Wednesday. The sort of outline for updating the website. Does anybody have any concerns about that, or can we go forward with that? It just allows us to ask the state to put a lot more information up on the website, so that as far as, you know, having more there for the public, and in a way that might be, you know, retrievable, rather than just under each meeting minutes. Did anybody have any concerns about that? I worked with Mary on this, and I worked with EEA on this to come up with this list.
I reviewed it, Pine, and I thought it was a nice outline. And to your very point, that sharing of information or data, I thought it was a nice outline. So I appreciate the work you put into that.
Yeah, excellent job. I mean, very, very comprehensive. The only thing I was wondering if there were some things on the town of Plymouth website, like some of the economic reports that were done, and I think the things I shared with you when we were doing the annual report on transportation, that maybe we could throw in there too.
So and that's not spent fuel storage and transportation, that's something else?
No, was spent fuel storage on there? I didn't see it. I'm
It's under
sorry.
active topics.
Oh, okay. Sorry, missed that. Yeah,
Okay.
got it. Thank you.
And what are you suggesting that maybe we have something that refers back to the Plymouth website?
Yeah.
Or do you think it would be wrong to have that under the public submissions where we have that financial?
I think that's a perfect spot for it.
All right, great.
Thank you. Great job.
So could we have a quick show of hands that this is okay to send to them, because they wanted to acknowledge that without anybody, everybody,
Oh, yeah.
somebody? John Moylan?
I vote yes. It's Dave.
Okay, great, thank you. Does it need to be more formal than that, John? Are we good to go?
I'm okay with it as long as Jack doesn't say anything. Okay.
Right
Is there a
on,
motion?
John.
Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all right, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right, we'll see everybody after daylight savings. Enjoy your next month. Thanks, everyone.
See you in
Thanks,
March.
John.
Yeah.
Thank you.